Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Election Detection Online, the show where we talk about politics and stare just below the camera to make you vaguely uncomfortable as we never make eye contact, though the truth is, we're just reading. Now, today we are reading about Peru, which is hopefully the last time that we'll be in Peru, as it's been one heck of an odyssey so far, and this keeps getting longer and longer and longer each time, and I'm going to have to publish it as a thesis or something if I keep having to add on to this article. But that's right, it's Peru. And this tumultuous chapter of Peru's recent political history has sort of expanded a bit more with the second round of the presidential election. So we're going to talk about that. But as I said, it's long as hell. So before we do that, I'd recommend you take a bathroom break, then come back, make some popcorn, sit down, get some hot chocolate, grab a blanket, a cat. I don't know, get nice and cozy because this gets longer every time. Now, saying that, time unfortunately does not allow us to go into depth about the ongoing political crisis, as it has been going on since 2017, and as I said before, is a thesis divided by analysts into 8 distinct phases. Now, for the sake of relevance and of time, we are only going to cover the key factors of phases 7 and 8, which is the November constitutional crisis. Now, the crisis began with the ascension of former Vice President Martin Vizcarra to the presidency. Now, Vizcarra gained the presidency after the resignation of President Pedro Kaczynski. Now, Kaczynski's resignation was due to his impending impeachment for money laundering. And once in office, Vizcarra distanced himself from Kaczynski by quickly beginning to implement an anti-corruption agenda. Now, unfortunately, the far-right-led Senate of Peru began to block and stall all of Vizcarra's legislation addressing corruption, because, that's not suspicious at all. This ended in September of 2019 when Vizcarra, with popular support, enacted a constitutional process that allowed him to dissolve Congress after 2 failed votes of confidence. Now, the Congress unlawfully rejected this measure and announced their suspension of President Vizcarra. They appointed Vice President Mercedes Arauz to the position. Now, Congress's action was struck down by a 4-3 judgment by the Peruvian Supreme Court, and its failure was cemented when the Peruvian armed forces announced that they would still recognize Vizcarra as president, and Congress was officially dismissed, with fresh legislative elections being held in January of 2020, and while the far-right Fujimorist-led Congress was replaced by a new, varied central Congress, the new Congress was described as being even more antagonistic to Vizcarra's policies than the previous one. Now, in September of 2020, the Congress began a campaign to impeach Vizcarra for moral incapacity in response to his continued push for anti-corruption measures. This drive was led by Antoro Umara, a former congressman who was actually in prison for 19 years for, guess, corruption and his incitement of a riot that killed multiple police officers. Now, this impeachment ended in a 65-36 acquittal with 24 abstentions. Now, the seat of vice president stood vacant through 2020. Under the Peruvian system, presidents are elected alongside 2 running mates. Pedro Kaczynski won the 2016 election with Martin Vizcarra as his first running mate and Mercedes Arauz as his second. Vizcarra's ascension to the presidency left Arauz as the sole VP, and after Arauz's resignation, following Congress's failed attempt to appoint her president, the seat just remained empty. Now, this set the stage for Vizcarra's second impeachment. In the absence of a vice president, this made the congressional leader the second in line for the presidency. In November of 2020, the far-right congressional leader, Manuel Moreno, introduced a second impeachment against Vizcarra. Moreno baselessly accused Vizcarra of corruption and mishandling the pandemic in what had been widely described as a coup. On November 9th, the Congress voted to impeach Vizcarra, and Moreno was sworn in as president the following day. Over the next week, tens of thousands of Peruvians gathered in protest against Moreno's presidency, and after 5 days of continued protests where police shot at least 2 protesters to death, Moreno resigned on November 15th in the face of human rights violation investigations. On November 17th, centrist progressive Congressman Francisco Sagasti was acclaimed as president by the Congress. So this finally brings us to the April 11th first round of the elections. It was the most crowded presidential election in 15 years in Peru, with 18 candidates contesting the election. All 130 congressional seats were also up for re-election, and incumbent president Francisco Sagasti did not stand for re-election, but instead ran as second vice president with Julio Guzman of the Purple Party. However, the Purple Party was eliminated in the first round of the election, and they only took 10th place with just over 2% of the total vote. Now, the first round ended in something of a surprising twist. The winner was Pedro Castillo of the Marxist-Leninist Free Peru Party with 18% of the vote. Castillo, a 51-year-old teacher and union organizer from rural Peru, was widely seen as an underdog candidate. He joined the presidential race quite late after Free Peru's original candidate, former governor Vladimir Cerrón, was disqualified from running due to a former corruption conviction. Now, Castillo stood out as a candidate as one of the only two in the race to have never held a government position before. The runner-up in the first round was Keiko Fujimori of the far-right populist Popular Force Party. Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, and the elder Fujimori was president from 1990 until 2000. His term ended when he fled to Japan amid investigations for massive corruption and human rights abuses, as well as violations for his use of death squads against civilians. He incited multiple massacres. Alberto Fujimori is the only democratically elected leader in history to have been convicted for human rights violations in his own country, and is currently serving 25 years in prison for kidnapping, murder, embezzlement, and torture. Keiko Fujimori herself was a member of Congress for Lima from 2006 until 2011. She first ran for president in 2011, but was narrowly defeated in the second round, and this situation basically repeated itself in her second presidential attempt in 2016, and then in her third this year. Now, the second round of the presidential election took place on June 6th, with the vote count being extremely close, and the count continuing for a week afterwards. The final count confirmed that Pedro Castillo and Free Peru had beaten Keiko Fujimori and Popular Force by a margin of 50.13% to 49.87%. This represents a difference of just under 55,000 votes out of the nearly 8 million cast, so don't any of y'all ever tell me your vote doesn't matter. Now, this is where the story should end. But unfortunately, we're stuck once again dealing with a right-wing candidate who lost an election and simply refuses to withdraw back to the darkest depths of the ocean and lie in wait until the winds whip the storms of evil once again and the moon shines crimson over the lands of the living. In short, Fujimori's having a fit. Despite the official count showing Castillo as the winner, and both Peruvian and international election observers giving the election a clean bill of health, Fujimori has made many baseless claims of election fraud and filed several lawsuits over the results. Her results are also incredibly racist in nature and seek the overturn of 200,000 ballots from rural and primarily indigenous areas of the country, basically based on that fact, and the fact that they voted overwhelmingly for Castillo. Now, does any of this sound familiar? Anything ringing any January bells for anybody here? Fortunately, Fujimori's lawsuits are basically dead on arrival, as not only do they have no basis in fact, but they were filed after critical deadlines. However, Fujimori's constant anti-democratic rhetoric is serving to stoke political tensions even higher and higher within Peru, and they have prevented the National Office of Election Processes from confirming Castillo's win, as they must wait to do so until Fujimori's lawsuits are officially rejected, and this process could very well take weeks. Meanwhile, Castillo's affirmation as president will not be the end of the uncertainty surrounding his presidency. Castillo ran and won on a left-wing socialism platform, but it is predicted he will have to legislate to the center during his presidency. Now, this is because while Free Peru is the largest party in parliament, they only control 37 seats in the 130-seat Congress. This means Castillo will need the support of at least 2 to 3 other parties in Congress in order to enact his campaign promises of enacting legislation that requires companies operating in Peru to reinvest 70% of their profits within the country. Now, Castillo also faces very justified criticism over his social platforms. Castillo has stated in the past that he is opposed to abortion and LGBTQ rights. He has also stated that promoting women's rights is not a priority for his government and has made a large number of racist comments about Venezuelan refugees, referring to them as criminals, human traffickers, and has called on refugees to return to Venezuela. He has also called for increased regulation and state control of the media, for Peru to leave the San Jose Pact on Human Rights, as well as the reinstatement of the death penalty. One way or another, it really seems like Peru has got one hell of a long road back to stability after the last 4 years of chaos. So,
Hey,
When are we going to publish this book?
I can get Scholastic on the phone.
Peruvian political crisis for third graders.
And then they did a bad thing. They wanted death squads.
I mean, if that doesn't sum up our writing style for this show, global politics for third graders.
Political crisis for your 8-year-old.
Did you think things were going well? Think again.
No.
So it's going to be interesting over the next few weeks. I've actually been checking this just out of general interest on a daily basis. And it's pretty well guaranteed. I mean, it's not pretty well guaranteed. It's guaranteed that Castillo won. I mean, the vote count's done. He won. But there is legitimate fear right now as Fujimori keeps going over and over and over again with her a bull excrement that there's sort of coup fears going on right now.
If the U.S. can do it, why not Peru?
There's also a couple of things I didn't mention here, which is Fujimori also ran on the fact that she plans to pardon her father if she were to get into office. And there's also an interesting little thing about her campaign. The president of Peru has, as long as they're in office, they basically have legal immunity. Keiko Fujimori is currently facing a long prison term for money laundering and corruption. So basically, her only way to avoid that would have been to win the presidency, get legal immunity, and pardon herself.
That sounds familiar.
It really does, doesn't it?
It sounds very familiar.
Really, really sounds like something we've discussed before in a little more of a northerly capacity.
But not too northerly.
No, not all the northerly, just part of
like halfway.
Northerly. But you know what? I can't think of what it sounds for. It reminds me of something, but I can't think what. So I think we're just going to have to leave that here today because that's all about the time we have and more.
Yeah. So thanks again for watching our show. It's the first batch of episodes for Election Detection Online. Hope you're enjoying them. Please leave us a little comment in the reply section down below. See what you think, and tell us what you think of the Peru political crises.
And give us a follow if you want to hear more information.
Please do. This is a vamp time. Vamp time. Keep detecting electing, guys.
We'll see y'all later.